A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was looking at some old project notes yesterday, and I realized something kind of unsettling. Most of the things I am actually proud of, the things I think are my best work, are the things that felt like a massive uphill struggle to complete. I have this internal yardstick that says if I did not sweat for it, if I did not lose sleep over it, then it must not be that impressive.
It is the classic labor theory of value applied to the self. We assume that the value of an output is directly proportional to the effort we expended to create it, but that is a massive cognitive trap, Corn.
It really is. I looked at a few things other people seem to value in my work, and honestly, those were the things I barely remember doing. They felt like breathing, and because they felt like breathing, I basically discounted them as having any value at all. I thought, well, if I can do that in 20 minutes while drinking a coffee, it cannot be a real skill. Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly that, this curse of competence where our greatest strengths are invisible to us because they feel ordinary.
It is a fascinating cognitive blind spot. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have been diving into the research on why our brains are so bad at self-assessment. Daniel is asking us to look at this paradox of talent, where being good at something makes you think it is easy for everyone. We are going to explore the mechanics of that blindness and see if the AI developments of 2026 can actually act as a mirror to show us what we are missing. We are moving away from an era where we tell the world what we can do and into an era where the data tells us what we are capable of.
It feels like a flipped version of that famous Dunning-Kruger effect. Most people know the standard version, where someone with very little skill thinks they are a genius because they do not know enough to see their own gaps. But we are talking about the other side of the curve, the part where the experts assume everyone else is also an expert.
The inverse Dunning-Kruger effect is arguably more tragic for the individual. When you are highly skilled, you assume that your level of competence is the baseline for everyone else. If you can synthesize a complex legal document in 10 minutes, you assume that is just what it takes to read a document. You do not see the 10,000 hours of pattern recognition your brain is doing in the background. You are blind to your own brilliance because it has become automated.
And that leads to this weird internal monologue where you think, I am not special, I am just doing the obvious thing, but the obvious thing is only obvious to you. I saw a study from Aalto University in Finland that came out in late 2025, specifically looking at this in the context of AI literacy. They found that people who are actually quite sophisticated with large language models often underestimated how much better they were than the average user. They genuinely believed the machine was doing everything, failing to realize that their own prompting strategies and mental models were the actual differentiator.
That study is a perfect example of the reverse Dunning-Kruger effect in the modern workforce. These high literacy users were overestimating how easy the tools were for everyone else. They thought the LLMs were doing all the heavy lifting, when in reality their own intuition was the secret sauce. The brain is incredibly efficient at hiding its own labor. When you reach a state of unconscious competence, your brain actually uses less energy to perform the task. From a subjective, internal perspective, it feels like nothing is happening.
So the more talented you are at a specific task, the less effort you feel, which leads you to believe the task has lower value. It is a total valuation error. We are literally wired to ignore our best assets.
It really is a biological inevitability. There is a neuroscience component to this called neural efficiency. If you look at functional MRI scans of experts versus novices, the experts show much less brain activation while performing the same task. The novice's brain is lit up like a Christmas tree because it is struggling to find the right pathways. It is firing neurons everywhere, trying to make sense of the data. The expert's brain is cool and quiet. It has carved out these highly efficient superhighways. Because it is quiet, the expert thinks, I am not even trying. They mistake efficiency for a lack of difficulty.
Which is why you see senior software engineers get frustrated when a junior developer cannot just see the architectural flaw in a system. To the senior dev, it is like seeing a bright red neon sign in a dark room. To the junior, it is just a wall of text. The senior dev thinks they are just pointing out the obvious rather than realizing they are using a decade of refined intuition. They end up being terrible mentors sometimes because they cannot explain the why of their talent. It has become a black box even to them.
This expert blindness is a massive hurdle in mentorship and education, but more importantly, it is a hurdle for the talented person's own career. If you do not think your primary skill is a skill, you do not market it. You do not lean into it. You end up chasing things that are hard for you because you think hard equals valuable. You spend your life trying to be a mediocre carpenter because it is difficult, while ignoring the fact that you are a world-class architect because that part feels like a hobby.
I have definitely fallen into that trap. I spend all my time trying to get better at the things I'm mediocre at because the struggle feels like real work, while ignoring the things I could do in my sleep that actually provide 10 times the utility to the world. It is like we are addicted to the friction.
That is the heart of Daniel's question about the tragic pitfall of giftedness. There is this staggering statistic from a systematic review published in 2024 that looked at over 280 research articles. Up to 50% of gifted individuals experience significant underachievement at some point in their lives. Half of the most capable people are not reaching their potential because of this mismatch between their internal perception and external reality.
50%? That is a massive waste of human capital. Why is the gap so large? Is it just that they do not know they are good, or is it something deeper?
It is a combination of internal and external factors. Internally, you have perfectionism and learned helplessness. If everything was easy for you in school, you never learned how to struggle. You never built the grit muscle. So when you finally hit a wall that requires sustained effort, you assume you have reached the limit of your talent and you give up. You think, if I have to try this hard, I must not be good at it. But externally, it is often about environment. If you are a brilliant strategist sitting in a role that only requires data entry, you are not just bored, you are literally invisible. Your talent has no outlet to manifest, so you start to believe you do not have it.
This is where I want to push into the technology side of this. We talk a lot on this show about AI replacing skills, but what about AI identifying them? If we are so bad at seeing our own brilliance, can the machines see it for us? Can they be the objective observer we lack?
That is where the shift in 25 and 26 has been really profound. We are moving away from self-reported skills, which are notoriously inaccurate, toward inferred skills. Think about platforms like Eightfold.A or Pymetrics, which is now part of Harvard. They do not just look at your resume and see project manager. They use natural language processing to look at the patterns in your work history, the specific verbs you use, the complexity of the projects you have touched, and they infer latent skills you might not even know you have. They are looking for the shadow of the talent.
I love that phrase. The shadow of the talent. It is like looking at the wake of a ship to figure out how big the engine is.
Or look at the neuroscience-based games Prometrics uses. They have these 12 games that measure things like risk tolerance, cognitive flexibility, and attention. You are just clicking buttons, maybe playing a game where you pump up a digital balloon or arrange blocks. But the AI is measuring your reaction times and decision-making patterns at a granular level. It can detect personality traits and cognitive strengths with up to 82% accuracy. It sees the superhighway in your brain even if you are just sitting there thinking you are playing a simple game. It removes the ego and the self-doubt from the equation.
I love the idea of using AI as an objective mirror, because friends and family are great, but they have their own biases. They might tell you that you are great at everything because they like you, or they might miss your talents because they have grown used to them. An AI model trained on millions of career trajectories can say, people who exhibit this specific pattern of behavior in their writing or their problem solving usually thrive in high-stakes negotiation, even if that person has never stepped foot in a boardroom.
There was a case study recently of a large company using these internal mobility tools. They found a woman in their marketing department who was consistently writing these incredibly complex, logic-heavy queries for their customer database. She just thought she was being efficient. She thought, I just want the data faster, so I will write this script. The AI flagged her behavioral patterns and identified her as a hidden data scientist. She did not have the degree, she did not have the title, but she had the latent skill set. They moved her into a technical role, and she outperformed people with 5 years of formal training.
That is the dream, right? Finding the outlet where the brilliance actually fits. But I wonder about the psychological weight of that. If an AI tells you that you are gifted in a way you did not realize, does that create a new kind of pressure? We talked about this back in episode 681, about unmasking the gifted label. It can be a lot to carry.
It can. The Davidson Institute has done a lot of work on this with profoundly gifted adults. There is often an existential crisis that comes with realizing you have been underachieving. It is that I was meant for something more, feeling that turns into I have wasted 20 years. Psychology Today published a piece in November 2025 specifically on this existential crisis. But the flip side is the liberation of finally having a name for why you felt different. Linda Silverman, who is a giant in this field, talks about the social emotional challenges of high ability. Giftedness is not just being smarter, it is a different way of experiencing the world. It is often more intense, more sensitive, and more prone to seeing connections that others miss.
So if the AI can act as that early warning system or that early discovery tool, maybe we can catch that 50% of underachievers before they hit that existential wall. We can show them their own superhighways before they get paved over by a decade of boring work.
That is the hope. We are seeing these AI coaches now that use the Ikigai framework. They look at the intersection of what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. But instead of you just filling out a worksheet where you might lie to yourself, the AI is looking at your actual output. It is looking at the things you do when no one is watching, the tasks you finish ahead of schedule, the problems you solve without being asked. It is looking for the flow state in your data.
It is basically a digital version of that observer effect. We know from research that mentors and peers are historically much better at spotting our talents than we are. But not everyone has a great mentor. Not everyone works in a peer group that is attentive. AI democratizes that observation. It is a mentor that is always watching your back, looking for the moments where you shine, even when you think you are just doing the obvious thing.
I think we need to be careful though, because there is a risk of algorithmic bias. If the AI is trained on what success looked like in 2020, it might miss the unique neurodivergent ways that brilliance manifests in 2026. A Science Direct article from last year talked about AI-driven talent identification with human insight. The key is that the AI provides the data, but we still need the human context to interpret it. We cannot just let the algorithm decide our destiny. It is a tool for discovery, not a judge.
I am curious about the practical side for someone listening to this. If I suspect I have these invisible strengths, but I do not have access to a high-end corporate talent intelligence platform, how do I find them? How do I start that audit?
The first step is to audit your effortless tasks. For 1 week, keep a log of everything you do, but do not rank them by how important they are. Rank them by how much mental energy they cost you. Use a scale of 1 to 10. If you find a task that other people complain about, but you find it totally frictionless, that is your primary signal. That is a latent superpower. If you are the person who actually enjoys organizing the messy spreadsheet that everyone else is terrified of, that is not just a quirk. That is a high-level organizational skill.
That is counterintuitive. We are taught that hard work is the goal. You are saying the easy work is the clue. It feels almost like cheating.
The easy work is where your competitive advantage lives. If it is easy for you and hard for others, you have a natural leverage. The second thing is to change the way you ask for feedback. Instead of asking, "What am I good at?" which usually gets you generic answers like, "You are a hard worker," ask people, "What do I do that you find difficult or confusing?" That forces them to identify the gap between your baseline and theirs.
I like that. What do I do that seems like magic to you? Or what do I do that you would hate to have to do yourself?
And the third thing is to use the consumer AI tools we have now as a mirror. This goes back to episode 600, where we talked about mapping your philosophy and identity. You can actually take your work history, or even a collection of things you have written or projects you have done, and feed them into a model with a very specific prompt. Tell it to act as a talent scout and an expert in behavioral psychology. Ask it to infer the latent cognitive traits required to produce that specific body of work. You would be shocked at how insightful it can be when it looks at your output from 30,000 feet.
It detaches the skills from your internal feeling of, this is just easy, and places them in the category of, this is a measurable asset. It is like seeing your own reflection in a high-definition mirror for the first time. You might notice features you never realized were there.
It moves the talent from the subjective to the objective. And for the gifted person who is struggling with underachievement, that objectivity is a lifeline. It proves that the brilliance is not just a burden or a feeling of being different, but a functional tool that just needs the right context. It helps bridge that gap between I am smart and I am useful.
We have to talk about the outlet, part of Daniel's prompt, because you can know you are a world-class strategist, but if you are stuck in an environment that does not value strategy, you are still going to be miserable. You are just going to be a strategist who is really good at being frustrated.
This is where the workforce is changing. One of the biggest HR trends of 2026 is internal mobility driven by these skill maps. Companies are realizing it is cheaper to find a hidden data scientist in marketing than to hire a new one from outside. If you are in a company that uses these tools, lean into them, update your profile, participate in the behavioral assessments. Do not just see them as HR busy work, see them as a way to get discovered within your own building.
And if you are not in that kind of company, if you are a freelancer or working in a rigid hierarchy,
Then you have to be your own agent. Once you have identified those latent skills, you have to actively look for environments that have a skill-shaped hole that matches your skill-shaped peg. Often, gifted underachievers are trying to fit into standard roles. They are trying to be a level 2 analyst when they should be a cross-functional troubleshooter. They are trying to follow a linear path when their brain is non-linear. You have to stop looking for a job title and start looking for a problem that your specific brand of easy can solve.
it is the Ferrari engine in a bicycle frame analogy. You can have all the power in the world, but if the frame cannot handle the torque, you are just going to crash or stall. Finding the right frame is as important as having the engine. Sometimes you have to build the frame yourself.
And we are seeing more fractional roles now, which I think is great for gifted individuals. You do not have to be one thing for 40 hours a week. You can be the strategy guy for 3 different companies for 10 hours each. That allows you to live entirely within your zone of competence and avoid the filler, tasks that lead to burnout and underachievement. It lets you spend more time on the superhighways and less time in the traffic jams of administrative work.
It really comes down to this idea that talent is not just something you have. It is a relationship between your cognitive architecture and your environment. If the relationship is bad, the talent becomes a curse. It becomes the curse of competence, where you are just efficient enough to be given more boring work because you finish it so fast, but not visible enough to be given the meaningful work.
That is the tragic pitfall, being useful in a way that keeps you trapped. The only way out is that objective awareness. You have to stop trusting your internal effort meter and start looking at the external impact meter. If your effort meter is at 0, but the impact meter is at 10, you have found your gold mine. You have found the place where you can provide the most value with the least amount of friction.
I think about how many people are sitting in offices right now or working from home, feeling like they are not particularly talented because they have never had to try that hard at their main tasks. They think they are skating by. They feel like frauds because they are not suffering, when in reality, they are performing at a level that most people would find impossible.
It is a form of imposter syndrome, but instead of, I am a fraud, it is, this is too easy to be valuable. We need to kill that idea. Value is not correlated with suffering. In fact, the highest value often comes from the things that feel the most like play. If you can do something while you are having fun that other people find agonizing, you are not cheating. You are just gifted in that area.
That is a powerful shift. If it feels like play to you but looks like work to others, you have found your edge. That is where you should be spending your life.
And that is where the human potential really shines. When you stop fighting your own nature and start leveraging the superhighways your brain has already built. Whether you use an AI to find those highways, or a mentor, or a week of self-reflection, the goal is the same, to stop being invisible to yourself. The world is full of people trying to be something they are not. We need more people who are brave enough to be what they already are.
I am going to go look at my effortless list for this week. I have a feeling I've been ignoring some things that I should be leaning into. I have been so focused on the things that are hard that I forgot to look at the things that are easy.
I will check my spreadsheets. I am sure there is a pattern in my data entry that suggests I should be a professional cat herder or something equally complex. I suspect my latent skill is actually finding the one typo in a 1,000-page document, which is a very specific kind of curse.
I think you are already doing that with this show, Herman. You are the one who catches my logic gaps every single week.
Fair point. It feels like breathing to me, but I suppose it is a skill.
This has been a deep one. It is a reminder that the most important data point in your life might be the one you are currently ignoring because it feels too simple. AI is not just for hiring, it is for self-discovery. It is a tool to help us see the brilliance we have been hiding from ourselves.
Don't let your brilliance become invisible just because it is efficient. The world needs those easy things you do. They are not easy for the rest of us.
Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the AI research and generation pipelines we use to explore these topics every week.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you are finding these discussions helpful, a quick review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify really does help other people find the show. It helps the algorithms see us, even if we are sometimes invisible to ourselves.
We will be back soon with more of Daniel's prompts. Until then, keep an eye on those effortless tasks. They are more important than you think.
See ya.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and